Hey guys, I'm back with a new episode. Talking to two people today. A friend of mine, Carmen, and her dad, uh, Tom, who he's known as W.J.T. Mitchell. He's an author and a professor in Chicago. So we're going to talk about how they lost their family member to suicide after he was diagnosed with schizophrenia at age 21. Yeah, and I just hope, these stories hit home with some of you. And, we could just address this elephant in the room and, be a little bit more comfortable in talking about our mental health to others and just be more open to people who want to talk about it with us. And, okay, I'm going to put them on now. Hi, Carmen. Hi, Tom.
Hi.
Hello.
How are you guys? Welcome to my mental health forum. Let's talk about it, where we take every Monday experiences with mental illness and families that have been dealing with them in the hope, of course, to eradicate the stigma around mental illness and hopefully prevent many, many suicides. So I'm in conversation today with Carmen, who's a friend of mine. Our kids go to school together. And Carmen's dad, who's a professor and author, W.J.T. Mitchell. How are you guys doing?
Pretty good today, yeah.
Can't complain.
Yeah.
So we got W.J.T. connecting in from Chicago, and Carmen's in LA. And we love technology, don't we? Anyway, thank you for talking to me today. Carmen is an award-winning filmmaker. She's making a movie right now, which she's completing. In fact, we're going to talk about the loss of their family member, Carmen's brother, Tom's son, Gabriel Mitchell, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia at age 21 and then died by suicide 18 years later. So sorry to hear, guys. It's different when you're born with an illness, but after you've lived with a person, and from my understanding, he was so bright and such an endearing, beautiful soul, and then to have been diagnosed with such a severe disease like schizophrenia, that in itself, that change must have been so difficult for your family, each of your family members. Let's start with, Carmen, were you around Gabriel when he had this switch, or I don't know, was it something that was building up to it, like his behavior started to change and then he was diagnosed? Like how did that happen?
Well, it's interesting. I was not around when he was going through this change, and it started happening his freshman year of college, and I was actually doing a study abroad program that year. Mm-hmm. So what I saw was I left home and I left one brother and I came back and there was somebody else there, and it really felt like that to me. I felt I remember thinking that I felt like he was possessed, and at the time, I didn't know anything about mental illness. I didn't know anything about schizophrenia. I didn't know what the symptoms were. I just knew that there was something very, very wrong. He didn't. We had a lot of sort of little sibling jokes, and suddenly he had lost his sense of humor completely. He was a very funny guy, and suddenly it's like nothing really computed in the same way. And his language had changed and he seemed very paranoid. So I saw the change very dramatically, whereas I think my parents, it was probably more gradual for you guys, I would think.
How was it for you? Because you were near him. You were in Chicago. He was in Chicago. At the time, was he living in his own apartment, or did he move out of the house at the time when he had the change, or was he living with you guys?
No, he had just left for college, and when we took him to NYU. We all drove out to NYU together, and he tolerated us hanging around for an hour or so to unpack his stereo and get his suitcases unpacked. And then it was clear he wanted us to leave because he wanted to start his college career. So everything looked pretty good at that stage. The first sign I had of something wrong was about a month, 6 weeks later, he called one day and said he had something really important to tell me. And so I said, yeah, what is it? And he said, Dad, I've figured out what the meaning of life is. I need to become homeless. And so I said, well, NYU has a great program in social work. You could work with the homeless. He said, no, you don't get it. The homeless, I've been hanging out with them here in Washington Square. And they are the only authentic people I've met. They are the people who are in touch with the real world. So I thought, what am I going to say? I said, well, it's a pretty tough world to live in. You're sleeping on a park bench. And he said, well, what do you guys know about it? You live in your cushy bourgeois household. You don't know what reality is. The homeless are in touch with it. And then he told me that he had given all his book money to homeless people. When they would ask him for a handout to get a meal, he would say, okay, I'll take you to lunch. And he would take them and talk to them. He also tried to smuggle one homeless man into the dormitory, and the dormitory, needless to say, didn't like that.
Oh, wow.
So he was very annoyed by that. So but it passed very quickly. It was, he was a guy with enthusiasms. When he got an idea, he would go 150% into it. So I thought, okay, well, this will pass. And I was much relieved when he said, well, by the way, when I come home for Christmas, can I get a new CD player? And I said, okay, good. That's a little more normal. And that was just it wasn't until later, really, until he took his life years later, that was the first thing I thought of. That was the first sign that something was wrong.
Something was off.
Yeah, the idea of becoming homeless, of course, that's one thing. That's, if you want to find the mentally ill, that's where they are. A lot of people lose their families, lose their friends, and just join this community of people without any support.
So, Tom, you wrote this book called The Mental Traveler, Father, Son, and a Journey Through Schizophrenia. So this is after his suicide. Did you write this after he left us?
Yes, I started the book several years after his passing. I knew that I was going to write about him, but I didn't realize it was going to be a memoir of his life until about 4 years ago. And so I dropped everything. I wrote this memoir. It went through 4 or 5 drafts. I'd never written anything like it before because I'm an academic. I write scholarly books. And so this was a totally new kind of writing for me. It was basically, I assembled it out of stories about Gabe's life. Not all of them have to do with mental illness. Many of them have to do with just what a wonderful person he was. Even after he became mentally ill, he was a very sociable person. He was a very creative person. And we had a very close relationship. So I sort of felt like I went through this ordeal, not exactly with him, but as close as I could be. And so I just told stories about him, including when he was 13 years old, a story of taking him to Mad Magazine, which he loved, and which was a kind of wonderful event. He didn't want to go to the Statue of Liberty. He said, Mad Magazine is the thing for me.
Mm-hmm.
So there was always something about, like in his DNA, that said going crazy is not all bad.
Mm-hmm.
He was always, even after he had the illness, his great goal in life was to make something positive out of this terrible illness, to use it as a framework for understanding how so-called normal people are. So he was a remarkable individual. I just wanted to make sure that his life would go on in memory, and that's why I wrote the memoir.
Yeah, and you guys mentioned that Gabe wanted to transform schizophrenia from a death sentence to a learning experience.
Exactly.
That is just so beautiful. For him to even feel that, right? To go through what he was going through, and then to help others, or just to help people shed light onto it. And say, you know, even to himself, and to say, well, you know, I'm going to take this as a learning experience. I'm going to take this as something I could, you know, transform my experiences into, and make something positive out of it. And that's just so beautiful and brave and courageous of him.
It was brave, and he wanted the learning experience was partly for himself, but also for us. He wanted to sort of take us with him into this world, and he wanted to overcome the stigma, because that was, as he said, the symptoms are bad enough. You know, hearing voices, being tormented by self-destructive voices, that's bad enough. But then when you tell people, I have schizophrenia, he said, that's even worse, because that leads toward feeling you're going to be cast out from society.
Yeah.
And when he talked about, when people would say, what's the worst thing about schizophrenia? He never said it's the voices. He always said it's the stigma.
Right.
The voices, he said, they can be terrible, but that's part of me. What I want to do is change society's attitude toward this.
Right. And that's the whole problem. That's what we're dealing with. And that's why I started this forum, just to help remove that stigma. Why can't we talk about mental health as freely, as openly, without being judged by people constantly? It's like you're a lunatic if you're going to a psychiatrist. You've got to be crazy. Just stay away from them. Like, that whole stigma that does not help a family that has a member going through that at all.
No.
That's what we want to remove. That treat them with that much more kindness, with that much more respect, and that much more empathy.
Yeah.
And that's what I wish that people could do after seeing these interviews. That we could have that comfortable conversation without squirming in our pants and just be like, oh, I don't know, let me get out of here.
Yeah.
But that's what we wanted to do. And thank you for shedding light on that. Carmen, before his death, Gabe and you collaborated on a documentary. That's what he wanted to do on that documentary too, right? To help remove that stigma and just kind of, what else? Like, did he want to document what he was going through?
Yeah, it came about in kind of an interesting way. When he was in his 20s, soon after he received a diagnosis of schizophrenia, he started doing these interviews with people, basically everybody he knew, random people in the street, and asking them questions about what mental illness is. And sort of the idea was like, how do people define mental illness, and does mental illness really exist? And is it just a label that we use to kind of discourage certain behaviors? Like, what is it really? And he was very interested in that question. And then maybe 10 years later, we were talking. He'd come out to visit me in LA, and by that time I'd sort of become a filmmaker also. And he was kind of going through a rough patch at that time. And I remember thinking he needs a project. And I'd always thought that this project that he had started in his 20s was really interesting. And so we started kind of talking about how we could shape this into a movie and what this movie would be about. And we were both very interested in kind of media representations of mental illness and misconceptions about mental illness. And so we just started brainstorming about what this could be. And then Gabe went off and shot a 10-minute piece that was sort of on the subject called Crazy Talk. So that's kind of as far as that project got. And then after his death, I kind of decided that this was my inheritance, like that I needed to finish the movie that we'd started together. And that, you know, and at that point, it kind of became a movie, not just about the sort of more abstract questions about mental illness, but it really became a movie about him and his journey inside the label of schizophrenia. Like what did that mean for him, and how did he navigate the illness? And you know, I kind of decided that I wanted to make a film about how he survived schizophrenia, not just how, you know, he died from schizophrenia, which I think in some ways he did.
Right. Let's talk about that for a minute.
Yeah.
Just, you know, maybe just explain to us like the series of events that led up to his death and suicide. What had happened? I think, Tom, you were around him as Carmen was away. What had happened around the time when this happened?
You mean at the time of his death?
Yes.
Yeah.
Just like some events that probably led up to it.
In the year leading up to it, he had held a job for a number of years as a produce clerk at the Jewel food chain here in Chicago. And it was work he was very proud of. Very important when people have a mental illness that they find a way to support themselves, that they have work. It's really crucial to your mental health to feel you have autonomy of some kind. And he was living on his own. He'd found a beautiful apartment in Marina City. And then in the fall of 2011, he said, I want to take a leave of absence from the grocery store so that I can go back to school and get more training as a filmmaker. That by that point, he knew he really wanted to do that, and start working seriously on this major film about mental illness. I can tell you about that film in more detail because it was a very grand project. It was going to be a 9-hour epic like Shoah or like Jean-Luc Godard's famous film, The Histoire du Cinéma. He said, it'll be called The Histoire de la Folie. We will have the entire history of madness. And he said, and Dad, you are my research assistant. Because my specialty is images and cinema and art and literature. And so I signed on to it. We had a seminar at University of Chicago based on his idea. It was called Seeing Madness, about how do you show it.
Wow.
So he took a leave from work, went back to school. What we did not realize at the time was that school was very stressful for him, that it was stretching him in a way we hadn't, he concealed it from us. He also had bad luck with one professor who was unbelievably obnoxious about deadlines. As a professor, I know that, you know, when I see students under stress, I try to make accommodations. So but we think that he was trying to increase his mental acuity by lowering his medication. One thing with schizophrenia, it is partly treatable. It's not curable, but it's treatable with anti-hallucinogens like Zyprexa. It suppresses the voices.
Okay.
But it also is like a sedative, a bit sleepy. And he wanted to be as sharp as possible. So we think that he cut down on his medication, and the voices took over so completely that it was like a fire in his brain. That's why I've never thought he planned his suicide. I think I would compare it to the people jumping from a burning building, as they did from the Twin Towers on 9/11.
Yes.
That you just can't bear it.
So horrific.
Because he didn't even know. He didn't want to do it. I think it was that there was no choice.
So
Some
it was Harry, lapse of fair judgment, and he just. So what did he do? How did he do it?
He climbed over the railing of his balcony, 59 floors above the street, and let go and fell 59 floors.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, yeah. I have nightmares about it still. Just imagining what his last minutes. It's why I have great difficulty going to his apartment now. It's when I walk in, I visualize his last moments. But I would call it like a fire on the brain, where you have to jump because there's no choice.
Oh, because the noises, they just took over. You're saying, and the treatment, kind of he toned it down a little bit, but then the noises took over, and then that's where he just sprang off.
Right, he had to turn it off. Yeah.
Oh, just to shut it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned these noises. I have it in my movie as well. Between Mountains, where the main character has these noises. He's not schizophrenic. He's not hallucinating. But when you have a loss, and I guess you guys relate to that, there's just so much of, there's just 24-hour thought going on in your head. There's just so many feelings and thoughts, and maybe I could have done this, and I should have done that, and the guilt, and all these thoughts just take over, and that's what even a character's going through, and then that noise, and how does he get rid of it? He has to just go out in the open, and in my movie, nature helps him. He just goes out there, and the universe helps him, and that's where he starts his spiritual journey. How was life after he was gone? The next 2 days, how did everyone feel?
For us, I think it was all a blur.
Yeah.
You kind of are like a zombie. We all were going through the motions.
Shock, right? I think you still.
Great shock. One thing that happened, boy, you find out who your dearest friends are.
I've heard that one before. Yeah.
This is the test. And we found out we have a lot of really, really great friends. Okay. One person in particular, my next door neighbor, he's a famous intellectual. His name is Bill Ayers, and he came over to comfort us and to find out what we needed, and if he took over our life for a week. He would drive to the airport to pick up arriving relatives for us. You don't have to do that. They can take a taxi. He said, no, they're going to need comfort too. And then he would make meals. He's a great cook, and he lives next door. So he would come over with a big platter of salmon or chicken or whatever, because all our family gathered. Carmen, of course, came home immediately. And my sisters came home. And we'd say, Bill, stay and eat with us. And he'd say, no, I'm just your cook for now. You need to be with your family. So, and then there were many others who just did things for us.
That's just so sweet. That is so selfless. This is the kind of human behavior that I want to see around. I mean, I'm sure all of us want to see around. And it's just beautiful. But it's also sad in a way that we only get to see this behavior in times of sorrow.
Yeah.
And I just wish at happier times we could see it, or it just, you know, pandemic now, people are going through what they're going through. And it's just the hardest of times for so many people, so much unemployment, so much of depression, anxiety all around as to what's going to happen. I just wish people could just be there for each other and just, you know, pick up the phone sometimes and just say hello. Don't just send a text. You know, be more into your friends a little bit more, you know, a little bit more probing. You know, not to the extent of being picky, but yeah, just a little bit more. You know, back in India, our culture is just like, well, we see someone that's, you know, a little shaky or out of context, we'll just get in there and we don't care about these so boundaries, you know. Oh my God, we're very possessive of our friends and family. We don't care about what they feel. Also, they don't want us around. I don't care. I'm here for you. But I feel in these times we need that kind of an attitude where you know, these people don't really know if you have a mental illness. You think you don't want others, but you really do. You really need them around.
You know, Vineesha, I participated in these walks for the last few years, suicide prevention walks, and what I've noticed is that so you have all of these family members, people who've lost people to suicide, and for each person that has passed, you see this tribe of supporters and people who love them and marching for them. And you see they're all wearing T-shirts with the person's face and carrying banners. And you just see, like, it's just incredible to see how we each have this tribe that we may not even be aware of that's rooting for us. And it's just, these
are the Out of Darkness walks, right? They were started by a person I had interviewed earlier, Nina Grover. At the time when she started it, when her son had committed suicide when he was studying, he was a second-year medical student at St. John College, and you know, she started this, and there was no other walk that existed in America before that. So those are the walks that you had gone to and participated in.
Yes, yeah, they were. I think they're very. It's really important for survivors to be able to connect with each other and to know that there is a community out there, because it's a very you can feel very isolated after something like this, because not a lot of people can relate to this particular type of death.
Right. Yes, of course. Though we do all have experiences with loss, but this is rare, right? Suicide is still rare, and you still, at the back of your mind, you always think that's never going to happen to our family, you know, and you don't want to admit it. But yeah, if you don't check in on them as often as you should, you know, times are very trying. I just think we should do our part a little more, as mentioned. Anyway, so you said he didn't leave back a note or anything, but you started looking at, Carmen, you said you started looking at his life after he left, and you found some clues and stuff. What was the stuff that you found? What material?
So, I mean, I had read many of his screenplays prior to his death. He had, you know, he was a very prolific writer. But after he passed, I started going through his apartment and kind of doing an inventory of all of his creative projects. And I do feel like I found clues. I found kind of this whole treasure trove of stories, and they were all sort of telling, they were all kind of, they had common themes, and a lot of it was, you know, narratives that showed this protagonist dealing with mental illness and overcoming it. So that was a story that he was trying to put out there and was really interested in. I did find some pieces in there also that directly addressed suicide. There is a scene in one of his screenplays where the protagonist is talking to a therapist, and the therapist says, have you ever thought of suicide? And the Gabriel character says, no. You think I want to die of shame?
Oh,
Which really, I really believe that that his suicide was not pre-planned, and that it was something that he felt that it was sort of part. I mean, it is part of the the narrative, I guess, of schizophrenia. Something like 60% of men with schizophrenia attempt suicide. Somewhere between 10 to 15% actually succeed. It's a very, very high percentage. So the story of schizophrenia is a very dark story. And I could see in all of his work that he was trying to write a different story. All of his stories had happy endings. He succeeded. He gets the girl. He, wins the Oscar. So he was fighting against this other narrative that is so part of the culture.
So unbelievably touching. It goes to show deep down he was such a positive soul, and he wanted to fight this off. He really did.
Yeah.
And that momentary lapse of judgment and those noises. It's even more sadder because he was trying to get rid of it. He was trying to overcome it. And it's just that much more, up to you guys. I mean, I'm listening to it and I'm feeling like, my God, this could have been prevented. What happened in the 2 years between 2010 and the year 2012 when you started making this movie? Do you think in those 2 years that, because he wanted to make this movie, he wanted to end, the stigma around it. And did a series of events happen there? Do you think that from 2010 to 2012, when he started to conceive of making this movie? Because I just want to understand Gabe before his suicide, and just a little bit, when he started to even have positive affirmations, right? He wanted to make this movie. So what had happened in those years? He was a fun guy. He was, leading up to the movie, is what I mean.
Yeah. Well, I can say a little bit about that. That was, in fact, I think that was the time of our most intense collaboration. He was writing one screenplay after another. He made a film about Bill Ayers, the last film he made. He asked Bill to read his memoir of his called Fugitive Days, a memoir of the 60s, and especially 1968 and kind of revolutionary moments of 68. And he took all these photographs from 68 that he gathered online, and he illustrated Bill's memoir as a documentary. And it was just a short 10-minute film, but really showed incredible talent. He also wrote a screenplay about his workplace. He worked at the Jewel food store, which in Chicago is called the Jewels. Nobody calls it the Jewel food store. It's always the Jewels. He wrote a treatment for it that was really hilarious. The plot of the Jewels was going to be a combination of a documentary about a day in the life of a big city grocery store. And he said, people don't know what goes on behind the scenes at a big city grocery store. The Jewels is going to reveal the hidden life of a grocery store. So the opening credits were going to be in the middle of the night when the stock boys come out. They often are wearing rollerblades to go through the aisles prior, restocking. So he was going to mount his camera on a skateboard at foot level and have lots of other cameras. And Rage Against the Machine was going to be playing, very loud music. The store's audio system gets turned way up in the middle of the night. And so it was going to start with this incredible kind of the stock boys as superheroes flying through the aisles, stocking the shelves. And then at the end of the credits, it was going to go dark, and you're going to see a bunch of criminals in the back room stuffing diamonds into watermelons. It was going to be a jewel heist as well. And the watermelons, and the climactic scene of the film, the watermelons were going to be carried on wagons to the Gay Pride Parade in Chicago. The watermelons would be thrown out of the wagons, burst, and diamonds would scatter all over the sidewalks, and they would rush to pick them up.
Yeah.
It made a very, very entertaining and interesting film.
Yeah. He had all kinds of ideas, but the most important was his idea of a film about the history of madness, not just schizophrenia, but depression, mania, paranoia, all of the craziness that human beings have been involved. So that's where he brought me into it as a consultant. And as I said, we had a seminar at University of Chicago, and he was a central figure in the seminar because he was making Crazy Talk, his short film about madness at that time. And it was a kind of pastiche of Hollywood films, interviews with homeless people on the street.
And Carmen, do you have any of this in your film?
Yes. I have a lot of his interviews that he did. I'm also including scenes from some of his screenplays, including some from The Jewels.
I mean, I for one would love to just, seems like a very, very intelligent and insightful human being. But I would love to see something like that. But it's so amazing that you've incorporated all of that. And so both of you have given such a beautiful tribute to your brother Carmen, to your son Tom. I'm just, I'm overwhelmed. So is there something you'd like to share about him that would give us more insight into him and thought processes? He seems very, very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He 2 years before Gabe passed, I had a terrible back injury, and I was in a wheelchair for a couple of months. Mm-hmm. And it was if he suddenly saw, hey, I'm not just the person who has to be cared for. I have to do some caring myself. Mm-hmm. He took over a lot of my life, especially going to work. When I would go to give lectures at the university, he would drive me, and we would arrange somebody to pick up the car, and then he would wheel me to the lecture hall. We found all of the disabled handicap ramps on campus. You don't usually map a university campus in terms of how the handicapped get around, but we did that. And it was like a flowering of his generosity. He loved taking care of me. Mm-hmm. And I have to confess, I liked it a lot too. Even though my back was killing me and I was not happy about it, I kept thinking, even if this went on for a long time, Gabriel's here. He's looking after me. And that was it. I could see the effect it had on him to take responsibility for me. Yeah. And I just thought, this is, strange things happen, that how can this be good for him? But it made him feel, I think, responsible for me. And so it was one of the bright moments in the last couple of years of his life. When he became the caregiver, we changed places.
So beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. just goes to show how lucid actually he was, right? Even though he was going through this traumatic experiences with his noises and schizophrenia, he was still so lucid in so many ways, still so compassionate and caring, and, knew his responsibilities in the son. And that's just so endearing. And I would just love to learn about him in your movie, Carmen.
Yeah, I've actually learned a lot more about him through making this movie, and kind of along the lines with what my dad was sharing. I talked to his caseworker, and she was telling me about one of the last times that she saw him, and she'd come up to, he invited her up to his place to he just moved into a new apartment, and he wanted to show it off to her. So she came up there, and she said she hadn't eaten all morning and her stomach was growling, and Gabe noticed, and he's like, Heidi, are you hungry? Can I make you something? And she was like, oh, no. And he ends up making her a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And it was just this sweet moment. And it's so,
he's so in tune with everyone's emotions.
He is. Yeah.
Or like this that you mentioned. That's I think what happens. Your just kind of becomes stronger,
Yeah.
Always when he takes something away, he gives something back to you. And, just that humanity that he had, that, it's just so beautiful to find that. A person who's actually ailing and sick himself in so many ways, to just still be giving and, so compassionate. It's unbelievable. Beautiful. Gabe had this idea that he talked about in the movie called the Infinite Cube. I'm very curious about that. Is that his theory, a scientific theory?
Yeah, so he had a whole theory about squaring the circle, that if you squared the circle, you could create this infinite cube. And he would draw designs for this, and he had sort of the math worked out. I never really totally understood it, but after he died, this artist, Antony Gormley, a British sculptor, went and created his cube. And my dad is showing a picture of that right now. And is it currently exhibited in the Smart Gallery in Chicago?
It's in the collection, but it's not. Yeah. The Smart Museum is closed, so nobody can see it right now.
Yeah, but it was exhibited there.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And when the pandemic is over, the University of Chicago's law school is going to install it in their lobby.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful tribute. Amazing. He always used to say that, in some of the excerpts I got from your movie, he used to say that people are malleable, that they're constantly changing even after they die. Does your family believe that? Do you think he's changed? Like his form may have been gone now, but do you think he's still here in some way, or there's some energies around? Do you believe that there's life beyond? Yeah. In the past, do you believe that?
I would say that I'm undecided on that in general, but in terms of Gabe, I do feel like he's having a second act, and I think it's his stories that we're continuing to tell, and bringing his work to light, and allowing the ending that he wanted to also come to fruition. I think my intention with the film is to really not just tell his story, but allow him to share his story. And I think it is another incarnation of him.
Well, thank you both for sharing your beautiful, heartfelt story of Gabriel Mitchell. And thank you for the memoirs. Thank you for the tribute you're giving. I would love to read your book, Tom, and I'm waiting for your movie, Carmen. Is there anything you want to say to everyone before we sign off?
Well, what I would say is, if you find that you have a mental traveler in your family, someone who has a mental illness, just remember that we're all mental travelers,
Yes.
more or less. We all go crazy at some point in our life,
Mhm.
even if it's only the most wonderful craziness of falling in love.
Mhm.
But being 5 years old means you're a little bit crazy too. That's we're not rational creatures. So to me, mental illness is part of a spectrum
Mm.
of that makes all of us mental travelers. Some have a much more difficult road than others. Gabriel had an extraordinarily difficult road, but he did the best he could, and we tried our best as well. So that's the meaning of the story for me.
That is beautiful. Very insightful. Carmen, anything you want to sign off with?
Um, I think that says it all.
That just says it all.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. And I wish your family well
Mhm.
in these holidays. And I wish you well in life. I mean, the story touched my heart. And I hope it reaches out to people.
Thank you, Vineesha.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having us.
You're welcome. I'll see you around, Carmen. And
All
thank
right.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.